The first pale light of dawn crept across the rocky outcropping where the hunter-gatherer band had made their temporary shelter. Mist clung to the valley below like the breath of sleeping giants, and the air carried the sharp bite of approaching winter. In the shadow of a massive boulder, Kyle crouched motionless, his weathered hands carefully positioning small stones in precise patterns on the ground. At 19 winters, Kyle bore the marks of a life spent alone. His heavy brow ridge cast deep shadows over dark, calculating eyes that had learned to see danger in every movement, opportunity in every sound. Scars crisscrossed his muscular forearms, some from predator claws, others from his own desperate attempts to fashion tools with nothing but sharp rocks and determination. His thick matted hair hung to his shoulders, and his robust frame spoke of a Homo erectus lineage that had survived when others had perished. "Kale friend teach us track sign?" whispered Neera, a small girl of perhaps 7 winters. Her round face peered up at him with the fearless curiosity that only children possessed. Behind her, 3 other youngsters huddled close. Jorik, barely 5, still clinging to a worn piece of mammoth hide. Vera, 8 winters and already showing the sturdy build of her people. And Tam, 6, whose quick eyes missed nothing. Kyle's expression softened as he looked at them. These children represented something he had never known: acceptance, purpose, belonging. When he had stumbled into their band 6 moons ago, half dead from starvation and fever, most of the adults had wanted to leave him for the scavengers. But the children had pleaded for him, drawn to his strange knowledge and the stories etched in his scars. "Listen well, little ones." Kyle's voice was barely above a whisper, rough from years of speaking only to himself. "Ground tells many stories. Say here." He pointed to a barely visible depression in the earth. "Four-leg walker, heavy, front paws deeper than back, means carrying kill, means cubs wait somewhere close." The children leaned in, their breath visible in the cold air. Kyle's teaching methods were unlike anything the band's adults used. While the grown hunters taught through demonstration and repetition, Kyle taught through understanding, explaining the why behind every track, every sound, every shadow. "But Kale friend," Neera's small voice carried concern, "Mother Asha says cave bear dangerous, says run when see sign." Kale's jaw tightened. Asha, like most of the adults, viewed his teachings with suspicion. They wanted the children to learn only safe, traditional methods, stay close to the band, avoid dangerous predators, follow the established hunting grounds. But Kale knew that safety was an illusion. He had learned to survive by understanding predators, not avoiding them. "Running good sometimes," he said carefully, aware that his words would likely reach adult ears, but understanding better. Cave bear not always hunt kill, sometimes only protect territory, sometimes warning enough. He moved his hands to show them how a bear's gait changed when it was merely patrolling versus actively hunting. The children absorbed every gesture, every nuance. In them, Kale saw the potential for a new kind of survivor, one who could read the land like the adults read the sky for weather. From the main shelter, voices began to stir. The band was waking, and soon the daily struggle for survival would begin again. Kale glanced toward the rocky overhang where nearly 30 members of their hunter-gatherer band slept. Among them was Thane, the dominant hunter, whose massive frame and scarred knuckles commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Thane had made it clear that Kale was tolerated, nothing more. "Quick now," Kale whispered to the children. "One more lesson before others wake." He pulled out a piece of charcoal and began sketching on a flat stone. Not the crude drawings the band usually made, but detailed representations of animal anatomy. See neck of deer, soft place here, here, and here. One strike, clean kill. No suffering, no noise to bring other predators. The children studied the drawing with intense concentration. These lessons went far beyond what their parents taught them. Where the adults focused on group hunting strategies and established prey, Kale taught individual survival skills that could mean the difference between life and death if they were ever separated from the band. "Kale teacher," Tam spoke up, his young voice carrying an intelligence that often surprised the adults. "Why you know so much about being alone?" The question hit Kale like a physical blow. For a moment, the memory threatened to overwhelm him. The day he had returned from gathering berries to find his parents' bodies torn apart by dire wolves, their shelter destroyed, everything he had known reduced to blood and scattered bones. He had been barely 12 winters old. "Sometimes," he said quietly, "land teaches hard lessons. Better you learn easy way with Kale friend than hard way alone." As the sun climbed higher, painting the valley in shades of gold and amber, Cale began to pack away his teaching tools, but something in the way the light fell across the children's faces, the trust, the hunger for knowledge, the innocent belief that he could keep them safe, filled him with a fierce determination. The band might tolerate his presence, but they didn't understand what was coming. Winter approached, and with it, the lean times that could scatter or destroy their group. These children needed more than traditional wisdom to survive what lay ahead, and Kyle would give it to them no matter the cost. From behind a cluster of weathered boulders, Thane watched the orphan's morning ritual with growing unease. The alpha hunter's massive frame remained perfectly still, his breathing controlled as he observed Cale instructing the children. At 28 winters, Thane had led this band through 3 harsh seasons, his decisions keeping them alive when other groups had perished or scattered to the winds. His thick, prominent brow cast shadows over eyes that had seen too much death. The heavy ridge of bone above his sockets spoke of his Homo erectus heritage, as did the powerful jaw that could crush bone and the broad shoulders that had carried injured band members to safety more times than he could count. Scars decorated his torso like a map of every battle fought and won, claw marks from cave bears, puncture wounds from desperate prey, and the long, jagged line across his ribs where a rival band's spear had nearly ended his life 2 winters past. What disturbed Thane most was not what Cale taught, but how the children responded to it. They hung on every word, with an intensity that bordered on worship. In Thane's experience, such devotion was dangerous. It could split a band faster than winter starvation or predator attacks. The orphan fills their heads with dangerous thoughts, he muttered under his breath, watching as Kyle showed them precise killing strikes on his crude anatomical drawings. These were not techniques for group hunts or defensive maneuvers. These were methods for solitary killing, for surviving alone. Thane's fist clenched around the shaft of his spear, its fire-hardened point worn smooth from countless hunts. The weapon had been crafted by his father, who had learned from his father before him. It represented tradition, proven methods, the accumulated wisdom of generations. What did this scarred waif know of leadership, of keeping a group together when winter winds howled and game grew scarce? The sound of footsteps on gravel made Thane turn. Asha approached, her expression mirroring his concern. At 25 winters, she was the band's primary forager and the mother of young Nira. Her sturdy frame and calloused hands spoke of countless hours spent gathering the roots, berries, and herbs that often meant the difference between survival and starvation. Her heavy brow and thick bones marked her as one of their people, but her eyes held an intelligence that made her one of Thane's most trusted advisors. "He does it again," Asha whispered, settling beside him behind the rocks. Her voice carried the rough accent of their people, shaped by generations of practical communication. "Every dawn, same thing. Fills children's heads with his outside thinking." Thane nodded grimly. The outside thinking was what they had come to call Cale's methods. Techniques learned through solitary survival rather than group wisdom. While effective, they promoted independence over cooperation, individual skill over collective strength. "Nira comes home with questions," Asha continued, her voice tight with worry. "Yesterday she asks why we not hunt at night like Kyle teacher says. Says darkness makes prey easy to surprise. What mother tells child about night hunters? About things that hunt us when sun sleeps?" The alpha hunter's jaw worked silently. Night hunting was forbidden for good reason. Their people had evolved as daytime hunters, their vision and reflexes adapted for daylight survival. Those who ventured out in darkness rarely returned, and those who did often brought danger back with them, predators that followed the scent of blood and fear. "And yesterday," Asha's voice dropped even lower, "I find her making things, little snares like Kale shows them, for catching rock mice, she says, but snares that could catch bigger prey, much bigger." Thane felt his chest tighten. Rock mice were harmless, but the principles Kale taught could be applied to far more dangerous games. Children who learned to think like solitary hunters often made reckless decisions, believing their individual skills could overcome any threat. Through the gaps in the rocks, they watched Cale demonstrate something new, a throwing technique that used the entire body's momentum rather than just arm strength. The children practiced the motion carefully, their small forms mimicking his weathered frame with startling precision. "He prepares them for leaving," Thane realized aloud. The thought sent ice through his veins. All his teaching, tracking alone, killing alone, surviving alone. He prepares them to leave band. Asha's breathing quickened. But why children a future of band without them? She didn't need to finish. A band without children was a band facing extinction. If Cale's influence grew strong enough, he might convince the young ones that they could survive better on their own, following his methods, rather than the traditional ways that had kept their people alive for countless generations. Maybe he not mean harm, Asha said hesitantly, though her tone suggested she didn't believe her own words. Maybe he just lonely, wants to share what he knows. Thane studied the orphan's face as he worked with the children. There was genuine affection there, real care for their welfare, but there was something else, a fierce intensity that spoke of someone who had learned to trust only himself. Such people, in Thane's experience, eventually poisoned the very relationships they claimed to value. Lonely ones dangerous, he said finally. They forget how to be part of group, start thinking their only way. As the sun climbed higher, other band members began to emerge from their shelters. Old Brack, keeper of the fire and holder of the band's oral history, stretched his ancient joints and peered around with clouded eyes. Dara and Mek, a mated pair in their prime, prepared their hunting gear for the day's expedition. Children called out greetings to parents, and the familiar sounds of community life began to fill the air. But Thane noticed how Cale's students seemed slightly separate from this morning routine, their attention still focused on their teacher rather than their families. It was subtle, a glance here, a whispered question there, but it spoke of divided loyalties. "What we do?" Asha asked quietly. Thane continued watching as Cale finally dismissed the children, sending them scampering back to their parents with kisses and gentle touches. The orphan's love for them seemed genuine, which somehow made the situation more dangerous rather than less. "We watch," Thane decided. "We learn what he truly teaches them, and if his outside thinking threatens band—" He didn't finish the statement, but Asha understood. Leadership sometimes required difficult choices. Choices that prioritized the group's survival over individual desires or attachments. If Cale's influence continued to grow, if his methods began to undermine the cooperation that kept them all alive, then Thane would have to act, even if it meant breaking the hearts of 4 children who had found hope in an orphan's knowledge. 3 days had passed since Thane began his watchful surveillance, and each dawn brought the same ritual. Cale gathering his young disciples in the pre-dawn darkness, their eager faces turned toward him like flowers seeking sunlight. But this morning felt different. The air carried the scent of snow from the distant mountains, and the game trails had grown sparse as animals began their migration to winter grounds. Cale crouched beside a shallow stream that wound through the valley floor, the 4 children arranged in a tight semicircle around him. His scarred hands moved with practiced precision as he demonstrated something that made Thane's blood run cold: how to approach a drinking predator from downwind. "Big-toothed cat comes here every 3rd sun," Cale whispered, his voice barely audible over the babbling water. "Drinks at dawn, when belly full from night hunt. Slow then, lazy, easy to surprise." Little Jorik, barely 5 winters old, leaned forward with wide eyes. "Cale teacher, we hunt big-toothed cat." The orphan's expression grew serious. "Not hunt, little braveheart. Learn. Understanding predator makes you safe from predator. Fear without knowledge kills. Knowledge without fear." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Knowledge without fear makes you strong." Neera raised her small hand. "Mother Asha says big-toothed cat kills in 1 strike. Says claws long as my arm." "Mother Asha speaks truth," Cale acknowledged. "But see here." He pointed to scratches on a nearby tree trunk, deep gouges that spoke of massive claws marking territory. "Cat leaves signs everywhere. Tells you where safe to walk, where dangerous. Smart hunter reads signs, avoids trouble." But then Cale did something that made even the children uncomfortable. He began walking them through the approach pattern, how to move silently through shallow water, how to position themselves for observation without being detected, how to identify the exact moment when a predator was most vulnerable. "Remember," his voice carried an intensity that bordered on obsession, "every creature has moment of weakness. Even strongest hunter becomes prey when attention divided, when belly full, when thinking of other things." Vera, the 8-year-old with quick eyes, frowned. "But Cale teacher, why we need know how to surprise big-tooth cat. Adults say run when see big-tooth sign." Cale's jaw tightened. "Adults teach group safety. Good for group, but what if you alone? What if separated from band? What if running not possible?" The question hung in the cold morning air like a physical presence. These children had never been alone, never experienced the terror of facing a predator without the protection of the band's hunters. But Kyle's scarred frame and haunted eyes spoke of knowledge gained through exactly such encounters. "My first winter alone," he continued, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Big Tooth Cat trapped me in narrow canyon. No escape, no help coming. Running meant death. Cat faster than any human. Fighting meant death. Cat stronger than any human." The children waited breathlessly. "So what I do?" He looked at each young face in turn. "I become like rock. Still, quiet. No threat. Let Cat come close, close, close. Then when Cat relaxes, thinks I just frightened prey." His hand moved in a lightning-quick gesture. One strike. Here, behind skull where neck connects. Swift, silent. Cat dies before knowing danger. Tam's young voice carried awe and terror in equal measure. "You killed Big Tooth Cat? Alone?" Kyle nodded slowly. "Not proud of killing, but proud of living. Cat meat fed me for many suns. Cat hide kept me warm. Cat death let Kale friend live to find you, to teach you." From his hiding place 50 paces away, Thane felt his heart hammering against his ribs. The orphan wasn't just teaching the children survival techniques, he was teaching them to think like apex predators. The demonstration of vulnerable points, the discussion of approach patterns, the casual mention of killing one of their territory's most feared hunters, it all pointed to a mindset that valued individual capability over group safety. But what terrified Thane most was the way the children absorbed these lessons. They didn't question the morality of approaching a resting predator, didn't consider the risk to themselves or the potential consequences for their families if such an encounter went wrong. They simply accepted Kyle's teachings as truth, their young minds shaped by his lonely wisdom. "Now," Kyle continued, producing a sharp piece of flint from his hide pouch, "I show you the places where life meets death in every creature, not for killing, but for understanding. When you know where life hides in body, you know where to heal wounds, you know where to avoid damage, you know—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "You know how to end suffering quickly, if time ever comes when that kindness needed." The lesson that followed was the most disturbing thing Thane had ever witnessed. With clinical precision, Kyle mapped out the vital points on small animals. A rabbit that had died during the night, a fish pulled from the stream. He showed them where to place pressure to stop bleeding, where to make cuts that would preserve the most meat, where to strike if a wounded animal needed to be put out of its misery. But the subtext was unmistakable. These same pressure points, these same vulnerable locations, existed in every creature, including humans, including members of their own band. "Remember," Kyle emphasized as he concluded the lesson, "knowledge is tool, like sharp stone, like strong spear. Tool not good or bad, depends on how used. You use knowledge to help, to heal, to protect those you love." The children nodded solemnly, but Thane could see the hunger in their eyes, the desire to test this new knowledge, to prove their mastery of these dangerous skills. As the sun climbed higher, and the daily routine of band life began to stir around them, Kyle gathered his teaching materials and prepared to send the children back to their families. But before they departed, he pulled them into a tight circle. "What we learn together stays between us," he said quietly. "Adults worry when children know too much. They forget that knowledge gives strength, not weakness. They forget that understanding danger, better than fearing it." 4 small voices whispered agreement, and Thane realized with growing horror that Kale was deliberately creating a secret bond with the children, us against them, knowledge against ignorance, individual, strength against group dependence. As the children scampered back toward the main camp, chattering excitedly among themselves, Thane remained hidden behind his boulder wall. The decision he had been dreading was becoming inevitable. The orphan's teachings were no longer just unconventional, they were actively dangerous to the band's unity and the children's safety. Something had to be done, soon. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the band's temporary settlement when Asha first noticed the change in her daughter. Neera sat apart from the other children, her small hands busy with something hidden beneath a scrap of hide. Her usual chatter had been replaced by an intense concentration that seemed far too mature for her 7 winters. "Neera, child, what keeps your hands so busy?" Asha asked, settling down beside her daughter with a basket of roots that needed cleaning. The little girl's reaction sent alarm racing through Asha's chest. Neera quickly covered whatever she had been working on, her eyes darting toward the rocks where Kyle often disappeared during the day. It was the look of someone caught doing something forbidden, but more than that, it was the look of someone who believed her secret was justified. Nothing, Mother Asha. Just playing. But Asha could see the careful precision in her daughter's movements, the way her fingers worked beneath the hide with deliberate purpose rather than childish exploration. This wasn't play. This was practice. Show Mother what makes you so serious, little one. For a moment, Neera's face crumpled with the internal struggle between obedience to her mother and loyalty to her teacher. Finally, reluctantly, she pulled away the hide covering. In her small palms lay a collection of sharp stone fragments, carefully napped into precise points. But these weren't the crude arrowheads that children typically made while copying adult hunters. These were surgical instruments, thin, razor-sharp blades designed for cutting with clinical precision. Asha's breath caught in her throat. Where did you learn to make such things? Kyle teacher shows us, Neera said quietly, her voice carrying a pride that chilled her mother's blood. Says knowing sharpstone making means never being helpless. Says if we understand how to cut, we understand how to heal. With growing horror, Asha watched as her 7-year-old daughter demonstrated the proper grip for each blade, explaining their different purposes with terminology no child should know. There were cutting implements, scraping tools, and most disturbing of all, several pieces clearly designed for piercing. Nearer, child, Asha's voice trembled slightly. These are dangerous tools. These are hunter tools, warrior tools. No, Mother Asha, Neera corrected with the patient tone of someone explaining something obvious. These are survival tools. Kyle teacher says every person must know survival, not just hunters. Says being weak makes whole band weak. The words struck Asha like physical blows. This wasn't her daughter's voice. This was Kale's philosophy emerging from a child's mouth, his lonely warrior's mindset taking root in innocent soil. And what else does Kale teacher say? Asha asked carefully, trying to keep her voice neutral. Neera's eyes brightened with the enthusiasm of someone sharing exciting secrets. He says understanding predators makes us safe from predators. He shows us where big-toothed cat drinks, where cave bear marks territory. He says adults teach fear, but he teaches knowing. Each revelation felt like another stone added to the growing weight in Asha's chest. The orphan wasn't just teaching survival skills, he was systematically undermining the band's traditional methods, replacing collective wisdom with individual capability, community safety with personal strength. Yesterday, Neera continued innocently, Kale teacher shows us silent walking, says hunters make too much noise, scare prey away. Says if we learn proper foot placement, we can track anything without being heard. Even track people? Asha asked quietly. Oh yes, Neera nodded enthusiastically. People easiest to track. Leave big prints, break branches, smell of fire smoke from far away. Kale teacher says understanding people tracking means never being surprised by enemy bands. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place for Asha. Kale wasn't just teaching the children to hunt animals, he was teaching them to hunt humans. The anatomical knowledge, the approach patterns, the silent movement techniques, all of it could be applied to human targets just as easily as animal ones. Neera, child, Asha said carefully, has Kyle teacher told you why he knows these things? Why he learned to track and hunt alone? For the first time, uncertainty flickered across the little girl's face. He says sometimes bad things happen. Says family can be gone suddenly, and then must know how to stay alive alone. Says teaching us means keeping us safe if... She paused, struggling with concepts too large for her young mind. If bad time comes. Asha pulled her daughter close, feeling the sharp stones press against her palm as Neera's small hands clutched her tools. The orphan's teachings weren't just dangerous, they were traumatizing. He was preparing these children for the same kind of devastating loss he had experienced, filling their heads with scenarios of abandonment and survival that no child should have to contemplate. Mother Asha, Neera's voice was small now, uncertain, is wrong to know survival things. The question broke Asha's heart. Her daughter was caught between two worlds, the secure community environment her mother wanted to provide, and the harsh individual preparedness her teacher insisted was necessary. How could a child choose between safety and strength, between belonging and self-reliance? Not wrong to know things, little one, Asha said gently, but some knowledge comes with big responsibility. Some tools too dangerous for small hands to carry alone. As if summoned by her words, the sound of approaching footsteps made both mother and daughter look up. Thane emerged from behind the boulder cluster, his massive frame casting a long shadow over their quiet conversation. His expression was grim, and Asher could see the weight of difficult decisions in his dark eyes. "Asher, mother," he said formally, "we need to speak about children's new learning, about safety of band." Neera instinctively clutched her stone tools closer to her chest, and Asher realized with a sinking heart that the confrontation she had been dreading was finally at hand. The orphan's influence had grown too strong, his teachings too dangerous, his hold on the children too complete. The time for watching and waiting was over. Now came the time for choices that would determine whether their band survived the coming winter as a unified group or fractured into fragments that might not survive at all. "Yes," Asher whispered, looking down at her daughter's frightened face. "We need to speak about many things." The confrontation came at sunset when the band gathered around old Brack's fire for the evening meal. The ancient keeper of flames sat hunched over his eternal duty, feeding dried grass and precious wood chips to the dancing light that had kept their people alive through countless generations. His weathered face, marked by decades of smoke and wisdom, reflected the orange glow as he watched the drama unfold with eyes that had seen too much. Thane stood at the edge of the firelight, his massive frame casting dancing shadows on the rocky walls behind him. In his scarred hands, he held the evidence of Kale's influence, the sharp stone implements he had gathered from the children's hiding places, each blade crafted with deadly precision. "Orphan," Thane's voice carried across the gathering like the growl of a challenged bear. "Come forward. We speak now before all band." The evening chatter died instantly. Every adult face turned toward Kale, who sat with the 4 children clustered around him, like cubs seeking protection from their mother. The orphan's scarred features remained calm, but his dark eyes flickered with the wariness of someone who had survived by recognizing danger in every situation. "I am here, Thane leader," Kyle said quietly, rising to his feet with fluid grace. "What troubles bring such serious words?" Thane held up the collection of stone blades, their edges catching the firelight like promises of violence. "These troubles, found in children's hands, made with skills no child should possess." A murmur of concern rippled through the gathered adults. Mothers pulled their children closer, fathers gripped their weapons tighter. The band had lived too long on the edge of survival to view such tools as innocent crafts. "Sharp stones are necessary tools," Kale replied evenly. "Every person should know tool-making. Makes band stronger when all contribute skills. These not tools," Thane's voice rose, his thick accent heavy with anger. "These weapons, made for cutting meat from bone, for piercing hide, for—" He paused, his meaning clear without words. "For killing." Asher stood then, her daughter Neera pressed against her side like a frightened animal. The forager's voice shook with maternal fury as she addressed the orphan who had poisoned her child's innocence. "My Neera knows pressure points on human body, 7 winters old, and she speaks of silent walking, of surprise attacks, of places where life meets death. What teacher fills child's head with such darkness?" The fire popped and hissed in the silence that followed. Kyle's jaw worked silently as he looked at the faces surrounding him, some angry, some frightened, all questioning the wisdom of accepting a stranger into their midst. "I teach survival," he said finally. "Nothing more, nothing less. World is dangerous place. Children who know only safety." He gestured toward the darkness beyond the fire's reach. "Children who know only safety die when safety ends. And who decides when safety ends?" Thane stepped closer, his bulk towering over the leaner orphan. "Who decides children need warrior knowledge instead of community protection?" Kyle's composure cracked slightly, revealing the pain that drove his teaching. "My parents thought they were safe. My band thought walls of stone and circle of hunters made them untouchable. But safety is dream, Thane leader. Only knowledge survives when dreams break." Old Brack spoke from his position by the fire, his ancient voice carrying the weight of oral tradition. "Many generations, our people survive through joining together, through sharing danger, sharing knowledge, sharing protection. Lone hunters die, bands live. Tell that to my family." Kyle's voice carried a bitterness that made several listeners flinch. "Tell that to parents who died believing group strength meant individual safety." The children, Neera, Jorik, Vera, and Tam, watched this exchange with wide, frightened eyes. They had never seen adults argue with such intensity, had never witnessed the community they trusted show signs of fracturing. Their teacher and their protector faced each other like rival predators, each convinced of the righteousness of their position. "You poison children against their own band," Thane accused. "Teach them to trust only themselves, to see community as weakness. This not survival, this destruction of everything that keeps us alive. I teach them to be complete hunters, Kale shot back, his calm facade finally shattering. Not helpless followers who freeze when leaders fall. Not victims waiting for rescue that never comes. I teach them to live when everything else dies. The words echoed off the rocky walls like thrown spears. In the firelight, both men appeared as their ancestors must have. Powerful, dangerous, driven by instincts that brooked no compromise when survival was at stake. Dara, one of the band's successful hunters, spoke from the shadows beyond the fire. Children need childhood, time to learn slowly, to make mistakes safely, to grow strong within protection. Your teaching steals that time. Winter steals more than time, Kyle replied grimly. Winter steals everything, and when spring comes, only prepared survive to see it. Mek, Dara's mate, stepped forward with his hunting spear, held casually but ready. So you decide for all of us? You decide our children need your hard lessons instead of our gentle ones? The confrontation was spiraling beyond words now, entering the territory where challenges were settled with violence rather than discussion. The children huddled together, sensing the adult world cracking apart around them. I decide nothing for others, Kyle said carefully, his eyes tracking the positions of every adult in the circle. I share knowledge. Those who want it, take it. Those who don't, he shrugged. Their choice. But not their children's choice, Asha interjected, her voice thick with emotion. Children trust teachers. Children believe what they are told. You make them choose between parents' way and teachers' way, and children too young to understand such choices. For the first time since the confrontation began, Kale's expression softened. He looked at the four youngsters who had become the center of his world, saw the confusion and fear in their innocent faces. I never meant harm to children, he said quietly. Only wanted to give them strength for hard times ahead. Then prove it, Thane growled, stepping into the full light of the fire. Show Band that your teaching helps more than hurts. Tomorrow, we test your methods against our ways. Hunting challenge. Winner decides how children learn. The silence that followed felt heavy as stone. Everyone understood the implications. This wasn't just about teaching methods or childhood education. This was about the fundamental nature of their community, about whether they would remain a traditional band bound by collective wisdom or evolve into something new and potentially dangerous. Kyle looked around the circle one more time, weighing his options. Then his gaze settled on the children, and his decision crystallized. Accepted, he said simply. Tomorrow we hunt. May the best methods prove themselves. Dawn came gray and cold, with storm clouds gathering on the distant peaks like the breath of angry spirits. The entire band had assembled at the edge of their territory, where the valley floor gave way to rocky outcroppings and dense thickets that sheltered both prey and predator. The air crackled with tension as two very different hunting philosophies prepared to prove their worth. Thane stood with his traditional hunting party, 6 experienced hunters who had worked together for years, their coordinated movements honed by countless successful expeditions. Mek and Dara flanked him, their spears gleaming with fresh fire hardening. Behind them, 3 younger but proven hunters gripped their weapons with the confidence that came from following established methods and group tactics. We hunt as our fathers hunted, Thane announced to the gathered band. Together, coordinated, each hunter knowing his role. We track the deer herd that winters near White Rock Stream. Clean kill, shared meat, proven methods. 50 paces away, Kale stood alone, except for the 4 children clustered around him like nervous cubs. The sight sent murmurs of unease through the watching adults. What kind of hunter brought children to such a crucial test? What kind of teacher risked young lives to prove his methods? You take children to hunt? Old Brack's voice carried disapproval that spoke for many in the band. This not children's trial, this test of teaching. Kyle's scarred face remained impassive. Children are my teaching. They show what knowledge can do when properly applied. We hunt alone as individuals must when group methods fail. Asha stepped forward, her face pale with maternal terror. Neera stays with band. Too dangerous. Mother Asha, Neera's small voice interrupted. I want to show what I learned. Want to help Kale teacher prove teaching good. The simple statement struck the gathered adults like a physical blow. Here was a 7-year-old child choosing loyalty to her teacher over obedience to her mother, individual capability over community safety. The fracture Kale's teaching had created in their band was now visible for all to see. Thane raised his spear, its point catching the pale morning light. Rules are simple. Hunt until sun reaches middle sky. Return with prey. Band judges which methods bring better results. Without waiting for further discussion, he turned toward the established hunting grounds where generations of their people had successfully tracked game. His party fell in behind him with practiced precision, their movements synchronized through years of cooperative effort. Kyle watched them disappear into the morning mist, then knelt down to address his young companions. His voice was gentle but serious as he spoke to each child individually. "Nearer, brave, you remember silent walking lessons?" The little girl nodded solemnly, her small hands gripping the stone tools she had crafted under his guidance. "Jorik, quick! You know how to read ground sign?" The 5-year-old straightened with pride. "Yes, Kale teacher. No difference between old tracks and new, between running prey and walking prey." "Vera, clever. You remember pressure points, healing places?" "Remember all lessons, Kale teacher." "And Tamwise, you know danger signs, escape routes?" "Know them, Kale teacher." Satisfied, Kale stood and looked toward a different section of the valley, rougher terrain that traditional hunters avoided due to its unpredictability and hidden dangers. "We hunt where others fear to go. We use understanding instead of numbers, knowledge instead of tradition." The departure of the two hunting parties left the remaining band members in an uncomfortable vigil. Mothers hugged children closer, fathers checked and rechecked their defensive weapons, and everyone tried to ignore the growing certainty that this day would determine far more than hunting superiority. Asha sat on a sun-warmed rock, her arms wrapped around her knees as she stared toward the direction her daughter had disappeared. Beside her, other parents shared her anguish, the terrible knowledge that their children had been transformed by teachings they didn't understand and couldn't control. "What if orphan methods work?" whispered Gara, mother of young Tam. "What if children succeed where we expect them to fail? Then we learn something about children we didn't know before," replied Oken, Vera's father. "But at what cost? What happens to band when children trust outside teacher more than family?" The questions hung in the air like storm clouds, heavy with implications no one wanted to voice. If Kale's methods proved superior, it would validate his entire philosophy. Individual strength over group dependence, harsh knowledge over gentle protection, preparation for loss over faith in community. Meanwhile, deep in the dangerous terrain they had chosen, Kale moved through the undergrowth with his young students, following in perfect silence. Their training showed in every step, feet placed carefully to avoid noise, breathing controlled to prevent visible vapor in the cold air, movements coordinated but independent. "There," Kyle pointed to a barely visible track in the soft earth beside a frozen stream. "Cave bear. Large male, wounded in recent fight. Desperate, dangerous, but also vulnerable." The children gathered around the sign, their young minds processing information that would have terrified their parents. They saw what Kale had taught them to see, not just danger, but opportunity, not just a creature to avoid, but a challenge to understand and potentially overcome. "Remember lessons," Kyle whispered as they began to follow the trail deeper into territory no traditional hunter would dare enter. Knowledge over fear, understanding over instinct, and always protect each other above all else. Behind them, the watching band could only wait and pray that their children would return alive, regardless of whose methods proved superior. The hunt of reckoning had begun, and by midday they would know whether their community would emerge stronger or fracture beyond repair. The wounded cave bear's trail led through a maze of fallen boulders and twisted thorn bushes that would have challenged even experienced hunters. But Kale moved through the treacherous terrain with fluid confidence, his young students following in his footsteps like shadows, learning to dance with darkness. "Stop," Kyle whispered, raising his scarred hand. Ahead, the morning mist parted to reveal their quarry, a massive male bear with dark fur matted by dried blood from a fresh wound along his flank. The creature stood nearly twice Kyle's height, even on all fours, his powerful claws leaving deep gouges in the earth as he searched for medicinal roots to treat his injury. The 4 children pressed close behind a screen of thorny bushes, their breathing carefully controlled despite the terror that should have sent them fleeing. Weeks of training had prepared them for this moment, not just the technical aspects of tracking and approach, but the psychological discipline required to function in the presence of death. "Wounded predator, most dangerous predator," Kyle breathed, his words barely audible. "Pain makes thinking unclear, makes attacks desperate, but also makes vulnerable. See how favors right side. Left hindquarters weak from old injury. Can't turn quickly to left." Little Jorik, barely 5 winters old, pointed with a trembling finger toward a narrow gap between two boulders. "Escape path, Kale teacher." "Good eyes, Jorik Brave. Always know where safety lies before approaching danger." The bear lifted his massive head, testing the air for scents that might reveal threats or opportunities. For a heart-stopping moment, his small dark eyes seemed to look directly at their hiding place. The children froze with the absolute stillness Kale had drilled into them, becoming part of the landscape rather than intruders within it. "Now comes the lesson," Kale whispered. "Not lesson in killing, lesson in understanding. Watch how bear moves, how he thinks, how he chooses. Understanding predator makes you safe from all predators." But as they observed the wounded giant, events beyond their control began to unfold. From the opposite side of the clearing, Thane's traditional hunting party emerged from the tree line in perfect formation. Their approach was textbook, coordinated, disciplined, following generations of proven strategy for dealing with dangerous game. The problem was that their strategy assumed an uninjured, predictable predator in open terrain. What they faced was a wounded, desperate animal trapped between two groups of humans in confined space. The bear's reaction was instantaneous and catastrophic. Instead of the defensive retreat that healthy bears typically displayed when confronted by multiple hunters, this wounded giant exploded into berserker rage. His roar shattered the morning air like breaking stone, and his massive form lunged not away from the hunters, but directly toward the nearest threat. "Scatter!" Thane's voice boomed across the clearing, but his hunters were already moving, some diving behind rocks, others scrambling up the steepest slopes they could find. Their coordinated formation dissolved into individual survival as the bear's charge scattered them like leaves before a storm. Mech, caught in the open with no cover nearby, raised his spear in desperate defense. The weapon, fire-hardened and perfectly crafted, snapped like a dry twig when the bear's massive paw swept it aside. Dara screamed her mate's name as claws the length of human fingers raked across his chest, sending him spinning into the rocks with blood painting bright arcs through the morning air. "Now," Kel hissed to his students, "now you see why understanding matters more than courage." While Thane's hunters regrouped and tried to coordinate a rescue of their wounded companion, Kale implemented the strategy he had been teaching. Instead of confronting the bear's strength, he used its weakness. Instead of attacking its confidence, he exploited its confusion. "Veer a clever, Tamwise, circle left, make noise, draw attention, but stay near escape routes. Near a brave, Jorik quick, follow me. We approach from wounded side where turning difficult." The children moved with practiced precision, their small size and silent training allowing them to position themselves where adult hunters could never go. They didn't attack the bear, they manipulated its behavior, using their understanding of its injuries and psychology to control its movements. The bear, already enraged by pain and surrounded by threats, found himself facing attackers from multiple directions. His wounded hindquarters prevented him from turning quickly to deal with the children on his left, while his attention remained fixed on the larger threat represented by Thane's hunters. It was exactly the kind of confusion Kale had spent weeks teaching them to create and exploit. "Remember pressure points," Kale whispered, as he and the two youngest children moved into position behind the bear's damaged left side. "Remember anatomy lessons, not for killing, for ending suffering quickly." What happened next would be burned into the memory of every witness for the rest of their lives. Using techniques no child should know, and displaying courage no adult should ask of them, Kale's students helped him implement a strategy that was part mercy killing, part tactical necessity. The bear, caught between multiple stimuli and unable to process threats from all directions, made the fatal mistake of exposing his vulnerable neck area while lunging toward Thane's regrouping hunters. Kale's strike was surgical, quick, precise, and devastating. The massive predator dropped like a felled tree. His suffering ended before he could react to the attack. Silence fell over the clearing like a heavy blanket. The wounded mech lay gasping against the rocks, his chest painted with claw marks that would scar him for life if they didn't kill him first. Thane's other hunters stood frozen with shock, their weapons still raised against a threat that no longer existed. And in the center of it all, 4 small children stood beside their teacher, their faces splattered with blood and their eyes bright with the terrible knowledge that they had just participated in taking a life. "Kale, teacher," Neera's small voice carried clearly across the clearing. "Did we do good?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, a prayer, and a revelation all at once. The orphan had proven his methods worked, but at a cost that would haunt everyone present for the rest of their lives. The children had learned to kill, and worse, they had learned to be proud of it. The journey back to camp felt like a funeral march, though the outcome of the hunt had technically been successful beyond anyone's expectations. The massive cave bear's carcass, expertly field-dressed by Cale and his young students, would provide meat for many days and hide thick enough to keep the entire band warm through the harshest winter storms. By traditional measures, this should have been a celebration. Instead, the procession moved in heavy silence, broken only by Mech's labored breathing as he was carried on a hastily constructed stretcher. The deep claw marks across his chest had been treated with the medicinal plants Cale's students knew how to find and prepare, but infection remained a constant threat. His mate Dara walked beside him with tears streaming down her weathered face, torn between gratitude that he lived and horror at what she had witnessed. Thane trudged at the front of the group, his massive shoulders bowed with the weight of failure. His traditional methods, the coordinated group tactics that had served their people for generations, had not just been defeated, they had been catastrophically outperformed by an orphan and 4 children who should have been learning to gather berries, not kill apex predators. But it was the children themselves who created the most disturbing element of the return journey. Nira, Jorik, Vera, and Tam walked with a new confidence in their steps, their small bodies moving with the fluid grace of natural-born hunters. Blood still stained their primitive clothing, and their eyes held a hardness that no child should possess. They whispered among themselves in the technical language Kyle had taught them, discussing anatomy and killing techniques with the casual expertise of seasoned warriors. "Did you see how the neck vertebrae separated so cleanly?" Vera murmured to her companions. Cale Teacher's precision was perfect, no unnecessary damage to the meat. "The pressure point worked exactly as he showed us," Tam added with scientific fascination. "One strike, instant unconsciousness, then death within heartbeats." Their casual discussion of death and violence sent chills through every adult within hearing. These weren't children anymore. They were something new and frightening, shaped by knowledge that had stripped away their innocence and replaced it with deadly capability. Kyle walked beside his students with visible pride, seemingly oblivious to the horror his teachings had created. In his scarred features, the other hunters could see the satisfaction of a teacher whose methods had been vindicated in the most dramatic way possible. He had proven that individual knowledge and preparation could succeed where group coordination failed. "Cale Teacher," little Jorik asked with bright curiosity, "when we get back to camp, can you show us how to preserve the bear's claws? The sharp ones could make good tools." "Of course, Jorik Brave. Bear claws make excellent scrapers and cutting implements. We use every part: meat for eating, hide for warmth, bones for tools, claws for working." The practicality of his response made it even more disturbing. This wasn't bloodthirsty savagery. This was clinical efficiency applied to death by children who had been taught to view killing as just another survival skill. As they crested the final ridge before their camp, the waiting band members came into view. Mothers stood anxiously scanning the returning hunters, fathers gripped their weapons with white-knuckled tension, and old Brack tended his eternal fire with movements that spoke of deep unease. The moment they spotted the procession, a collective gasp rose from the assembled community. Asha broke from the group and ran toward her daughter, her maternal instincts overriding everything else. But when she reached nearer and tried to embrace her, the child's reaction stopped her cold. There was no desperate relief, no childish tears, no need for comfort and reassurance. Instead, Nira submitted to the embrace with patient tolerance, like an adult humoring a worried relative. "I am fine, Mother Asha," Nira said calmly. "Hunt was successful. We brought meat and proved Cale Teacher's methods work." The simple statement, delivered in a voice devoid of childish excitement or trauma, struck Asha like a physical blow. This wasn't her daughter, not the giggling 7-year-old who had left that morning. This was someone else wearing her child's face, speaking with an adult's composure about matters that should have left her screaming with nightmares. Other parents experienced similar shock as they attempted to reconnect with their transformed children. Gara reached for Tam, only to find him discussing the optimal angle for severing spinal columns. Oken tried to comfort Vera, who responded by explaining the medicinal properties of various internal organs. Each reunion revealed the same terrible truth. The children who had left that morning were gone forever. "What have you done to them?" Asha's voice cracked as she turned on Cale with fury born of profound loss. "What have you turned our babies into?" Cale's expression remained maddeningly calm. "I have given them strength to survive in dangerous world. Today they faced death and conquered it. Today they learned they need not be victims of circumstance. "They are 7 years old," Asha screamed, her voice echoing off the rocky walls. 7. They should fear monsters, not kill them. They should run from danger, not seek it out. "And when running fails?" Kale's voice hardened. "When monsters catch them anyway. When danger finds them despite all precautions. What then, Asha Mother? Do they die as helpless prey, or do they fight as capable predators?" Thane stepped forward, his massive frame trembling with suppressed rage. The morning's humiliation burned in his chest like acid. His hunters scattered, his methods proven inadequate, his leadership called into question by children who had succeeded where he had failed. "You steal their childhood," he growled. "You take innocent ones and make them into what? Killers? Warriors? Things that look like our children but think like weapons." "I make them into survivors," Kyle replied without flinching. "World cares nothing for innocence. Winter cares nothing for childhood. Predators care nothing for what we wish children could be. I teach them to live in world as it is, not as we pretend it should be." The philosophical divide that had been growing for weeks now yawned like a chasm between two worldviews that could never be reconciled. On one side stood the traditional values of community, protection, and gradual learning within safety. On the other stood the harsh pragmatism of individual capability, early preparation, and strength forged through direct confrontation with danger. Old Brack rose from his position by the fire, his ancient joints creaking with the effort. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of countless generations who had faced similar choices about how to prepare their young for an uncertain world. "In all my winters," he said slowly, "never have I seen children change so completely, so quickly. Question is not whether Orphan's methods work. Clearly they do. Question is whether working methods are right methods, whether survival at any cost is truly survival at all." The old firekeeper's words struck at the heart of the dilemma facing the band. Kale's teachings undeniably worked. The evidence lay in the massive bear carcass and the 4 competent young hunters who had helped bring it down. But success measured in survival skills might be failure when measured in human cost. As the sun reached its zenith and the formal hunting period ended, the band faced a decision that would determine not just their future methods of education, but the very nature of what they wanted their community to become. The children had proven they could kill. Now the adults had to decide whether they should. The feast that night should have been a celebration. Fresh bear meat roasted over old Brack's fire, the rich fat crackling and sending mouth-watering aromas through the camp. The massive hide, already being prepared for winter use, promised warmth through the coldest months ahead. By every traditional measure, the hunt had been a triumph that would ensure the band's survival. But the mood around the fire was funereal. Adults sat in tight clusters, their conversations conducted in hushed whispers as they watched their transformed children with a mixture of awe and horror. The 4 young hunters sat apart with Kyle, their blood-stained clothing worn like badges of honor, their voices carrying the clinical terminology of experienced killers. The muscle separation along the shoulder joint was textbook perfect, Vera was explaining to her companions, using a sharp bone to illustrate anatomical points on a scrap of hide. Clean cut through the connective tissue, minimal damage to surrounding areas. "Kale teacher says knowing anatomy helps with healing too," Tam added, his 6-year-old voice discussing medical procedures that would challenge adult healers. "Same pressure points that stop life can also save life if you know which direction to push." Their parents listened with growing revulsion as their babies discussed death and dismemberment with the casual expertise of seasoned warriors. These weren't children anymore. They were something else, shaped by knowledge that had stolen their innocence and replaced it with capabilities that felt fundamentally wrong. Asha finally reached her breaking point when she heard her 7-year-old daughter explaining to young Jorik how to identify the optimal striking angle for various neck vertebrae. "Enough!" she screamed, lunging toward the group and snatching Neera away from Kyle's side. "No more lessons, no more teaching. You have poisoned my child's mind with your death knowledge." Neera struggled in her mother's grip with surprising strength, her small face set in lines of mature determination. "Mother Asha, let go. Kyle teacher has important things to show us about preserving organs for winter storage." The casual way she discussed organ preservation, as if it were as normal as berry gathering or hide tanning, sent ice through every adult's veins. This wasn't educational curiosity. This was the complete transformation of a child's worldview, from life-affirming to death-focused. "You hear her? Asha turned to face the gathered band, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. My baby speaks of death like others speak of games. She thinks with killer's mind, sees world through warrior's eyes. This is not child. This is weapon shaped like child. Other parents began voicing similar concerns, their voices rising in a chorus of parental anguish. Gara wept openly as she described finding Tam practicing silent walking techniques on sleeping band members, testing how close he could approach before being detected. Oaken revealed that Vera had been studying the adult's vulnerable points during daily activities, cataloguing weaknesses with predatory focus. But it was little Jorik's mother, Senna, who delivered the most chilling revelation of all. "Yesterday," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire, "I wake to find him standing over my sleeping mat, just watching. When I ask what he's doing, he says practicing what Kale teacher showed him about observing prey during vulnerable moments." The silence that followed was absolute. The image of a 5-year-old child studying his sleeping mother like a predator, analyzing potential prey, struck at the deepest fears every parent harbored about what their children might become. Kale rose slowly to his feet, his scarred features reflecting the firelight like a mask of ancient bronze. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had stared into the abyss and found it staring back. "You fear what children have become," he said quietly. "But what you should fear is what they were before. Helpless, dependent, unprepared for a world that cares nothing for your protective wishes. Today they faced death and conquered it. Tomorrow, when danger comes for them, they will not die as frightened prey." "They are not prey," Thane roared, his massive frame trembling with rage. "They are children. They are future of band, meant to grow slowly into strength, not be forced into killing before they understand difference between right and wrong." "Right and wrong?" Kale's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "Tell me about right and wrong when dire wolves tear apart your family. Tell me about moral choices when starvation forces you to compete with predators for carrion. World has no morals, Thane leader, only survivors and corpses." The philosophical chasm between them had become unbridgeable. Kyle saw the world as a place where strength and knowledge were the only protection against inevitable suffering. The band saw it as a community where cooperation and gradual learning could provide safety and meaning beyond mere survival. "You speak from hurt," Old Brack said gently, his ancient voice carrying compassion for the orphan's obvious trauma. "Lost family, lost band, lost everything. Pain teaches harsh lessons, makes heart hard. But pain not only teacher available. Pain is the only honest teacher," Kyle shot back. "Everything else is comfortable lie told to children until reality breaks their dreams." As the argument raged, the 4 transformed children watched with detached interest, as if observing a fascinating behavioral study. Their emotional distance from the conflict was perhaps the most disturbing element of all. They had been taught to analyze situations clinically rather than respond to them emotionally. "Look at them," Asha said, pointing toward her daughter and the other children. "Look how they watch us argue about their futures. No fear, no sadness, no confusion. They feel nothing because you have taught them that feeling is weakness." For the first time, Kyle's composure wavered. He looked at his 4 students, really looked at them, and perhaps for the first time saw what his teachings had cost. They had gained deadly knowledge and practical skills, but they had lost the capacity for innocent joy, for childish wonder, for the simple emotional connections that made life worth living. "I taught them to survive," he whispered, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "You taught them to stop being children," Asha replied. "And children who stop being children before their time. What do they become when they grow up? What kind of adults emerge from such teaching?" The question hung in the night air like smoke from the dying fire. Around the circle, adult faces reflected the same terrible understanding. They were witnessing not just the transformation of 4 children, but potentially the birth of something that might threaten the very foundations of their community. When Vera began explaining to Jorik the optimal methods for tracking sleeping humans without detection, several parents reached their limits simultaneously. The confrontation that followed would determine whether the band could find a way forward together, or whether Kale's influence would force them to make choices that might destroy everything they had built. The breaking point had arrived, and like all such moments, it demanded decisions that would echo through generations yet unborn. The confrontation erupted when Vera, with the casual precision of a seasoned anatomist, began demonstrating on sleeping band member Koru how to locate the carotid artery for what she called quick unconsciousness techniques. The 8-year-old's clinical approach to potential violence against a trusted community member shattered the last vestiges of parental restraint. "Stop!" Oaken's roar echoed off the rocky walls as he lunged forward to pull his daughter away from the sleeping man. No more of this madness." But Vera resisted with surprising strength, her small hands maintaining their position on Koru's neck as she looked up at her father with eyes devoid of childish guilt or confusion. "Father Oaken, this is important lesson," she said with patient condescension. "Knowledge of pressure points saves lives during emergencies. Kale teacher says, I care nothing for what Orphan says." Oaken's voice cracked with emotional strain as he physically pried his daughter's hands away from their victim. "You are my child, not his weapon." The commotion woke Koru, who sat up in confusion only to find himself at the center of a circle of horrified adults. When he learned that a child had been studying his vulnerable points while he slept, practicing techniques for rendering him unconscious, his face went pale with primal terror. "They could have killed me," he whispered, his hand instinctively moving to protect his throat. "While I slept, trusted and safe, they could have killed me." The realization sent shockwaves through the entire band. If the children could approach sleeping adults undetected and had been taught exactly where to strike for maximum effect, then no one was safe. The community's most basic assumption, that they could trust their own young, had been systematically undermined by Kale's teachings. Thane rose to his full imposing height, his massive frame casting dancing shadows in the firelight. When he spoke, his voice carried the finality of absolute leadership. "Enough," he said, the single word cutting through the chaos like a stone axe through bone. "This ends now, tonight." He turned to face Kale directly, and every adult in the band could see the decision crystallizing in his dark eyes. The Alpha Hunter had reached the conclusion that the orphan's influence posed an existential threat to their community's survival. "You have proven your methods work," Thane continued, his words measured and deliberate. "Children can kill, children can track, children can survive using knowledge no child should possess, but you have also proven something else, that survival without humanity is not survival at all." Kyle stood slowly, his scarred hands empty, but his posture radiating the coiled tension of someone prepared for violence. Around him, the 4 children arranged themselves in a defensive formation that spoke of training no parent had authorized. "You would condemn them to die as innocent victims?" Kyle's voice carried genuine bewilderment. "You would choose their deaths over their transformation?" "I would choose their childhood over your nightmares," Thane replied. "I would choose community over isolation, gradual learning over traumatic knowledge, hope over despair." The philosophical divide had become unbridgeable. Every word exchanged only emphasized how completely the two men viewed the world through incompatible lenses. Kale saw preparation and strength, Thane saw corruption and threat. Old Brack struggled to his feet, his ancient joints protesting the effort. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had witnessed the rise and fall of many communities. "In long life I see many teachers," he said slowly. "Some teach with gentleness, some with firmness. Some build up, some tear down. Orphan teaches truth. World is dangerous, death is real, strength is necessary. But Orphan also teaches fear, that community cannot protect, that trust leads to betrayal, that love makes weak." The Firekeeper's words struck at the heart of the conflict. Kale's teachings weren't just about survival skills, they were about worldview. He was raising children who would trust no one completely, who would always see potential enemies in those around them, who would choose individual strength over communal bonds. "I teach reality," Kyle said defensively. "I teach them to see world as it truly is, not as we wish it could be." "You teach them your reality," Asha interjected, her voice thick with maternal pain. "Reality of Orphan who lost everything, who survived alone, who learned to trust only himself. But that is not our reality. We survive together. We protect each other. We share burdens and joys alike." For the first time since the confrontation began, uncertainty flickered across Kale's weathered features. He looked at the 4 children who had become his entire world, saw the way they stood ready to defend him against their own parents, and perhaps finally understood what his teaching had cost them. "They love you more than us now," Senna said quietly, her words striking like physical blows. "My Jorik looks to you for approval, to you for guidance, to you for meaning. His own mother has become stranger to him." The accusation hung in the air, like smoke from a dying fire. Around the circle, Parents nodded with the bitter recognition of truth. Their children had been systematically alienated from their families, their loyalties transferred to a teacher who valued capability over connection. "I never meant," Kyle began, but his words trailed off as he realized the futility of intentions when measured against results. Thane stepped forward, his decision crystallized into action. "You will leave," he said with finality that brooked no argument. "Tonight, before dawn. Take your knowledge and your methods and your lonely wisdom, and find some other place to plant them." The 4 children reacted instantly, their training overriding their family bonds as they moved to form a protective circle around their teacher. The sight of young Nira, little Jorik, clever Vera, and wise Tam preparing to defend a stranger against their own parents was the final proof of how completely Kale's influence had corrupted natural relationships. "And if we refuse to let him go?" Nira asked, her 7-year-old voice carrying adult determination. "Kale teacher is ours now. We choose him over you." The words struck every parent like spear thrusts to the heart. Their own children, speaking with voices they had taught to form words, were choosing an outsider over the families who had loved and protected them since birth. But Kale surprised everyone by kneeling down to address his students directly. When he spoke, his voice was gentler than anyone had heard it since his arrival. "Little ones," he said quietly, "you have learned all I can teach you. You are strong now, capable, ready to face whatever dangers await. But," he paused, struggling with words that seemed to catch in his throat, "but you are also still children. You still need family, need community, need love that asks nothing in return." The admission cost him visible effort. For months he had built his entire identity around being the teacher these children needed. Now he was acknowledging that perhaps their needs went beyond what he could provide. "You want us to stay with them?" Tam asked with genuine confusion. "Even though they want to make us weak again?" "I want you to have what I never could," Kale replied, his scarred hands resting gently on the boy's shoulders. "Choice between strength and love. I can give you strength, already have given you strength. They can give you love. Maybe you need both." The moment of unexpected wisdom hung in the cold night air, like a bridge between 2 incompatible worlds. For the first time since his arrival, the orphan had acknowledged that his harsh teachings might not be complete in themselves. But the damage was done. The children he had trained to see the world through predators' eyes could not simply return to innocent trust. The parents whose authority had been undermined could not easily forgive the transformation of their young. The community whose unity had been shattered could not be easily repaired. Thane's ultimatum remained. Kyle would leave before dawn. The only question now was whether the children he had changed would choose to go with him or find some way to bridge the gap between the love they had lost and the strength they had gained. Dawn approached with the reluctance of a wounded animal, grey light seeping slowly across the valley as the band faced the most difficult decision in their collective memory. Kyle sat apart from the main group, his few possessions gathered in a small bundle beside him, while the 4 children maintained their vigil around him, like young wolves protecting their pack leader. The night had been sleepless for everyone. Parents had spent the dark hours wrestling with the impossible choice between safety and love, between protecting their community and saving their children. The youngsters had huddled with their teacher, whispering plans and contingencies in the clinical language he had taught them to use when facing threats. As the first pale sunlight touched the rocky walls of their shelter, Thane approached the small group with heavy steps. His massive frame cast a long shadow over the children, who looked up at him with eyes that held no fear, only the calculating assessment of potential adversaries. "Time has come," he said quietly. "Orphan must leave, as decided. Question remains. Do you go with teacher or stay with families?" The question hung in the cold morning air like the breath of dying giants. Around the camp, parents held their collective breath while their transformed children considered options no young ones should ever have to contemplate. Nira was the first to speak, her 7-year-old voice carrying an adult certainty. "We stay with Kale teacher. He shows us truth, he makes us strong, family." She paused, looking toward her mother with something that might have been regret. "Family teaches pretty lies that get people killed." Usha's sob echoed off the stone walls, raw and broken. To hear her daughter dismiss their bond as pretty lies struck deeper than any physical wound ever could. But young Jorik surprised everyone by standing up and walking slowly toward his mother Senna. His 5-year-old frame seemed suddenly fragile after weeks of warrior training, and when he spoke, his voice carried confusion that reminded everyone he was still just a child. "Kale teacher," he said without turning around. You say I need both strength and love? Yes, little Braveheart. Both are important. Jorik looked up at his mother, with eyes that held too much knowledge for his years. If I go with you, will I forget how to love Mother Senna? The question struck Kale like a physical blow. In all his teaching about survival and strength, he had never considered what his methods might cost in terms of basic human connection. Now faced with the child's innocent inquiry, he realized the terrible truth. I do not know, he admitted quietly. My own love died with my family. Perhaps I cannot teach what I no longer remember. The admission sent ripples of shock through both the children and the adults. Here was their seemingly all-knowing teacher, acknowledging a fundamental limitation in his wisdom. He could teach them to survive, but he could not teach them to live meaningfully within a community. Tam stepped forward, his 6-year-old mind grappling with concepts that challenged even adult understanding. If we stay with families, will we forget warrior knowledge? Will we become weak again? Thane knelt down to address the boy directly, his scarred features softening with unexpected gentleness. Knowledge once learned, not easily forgotten, he said carefully. But knowledge must serve life, not rule it. Warrior skills good when needed for protection. But most days life needs other skills, sharing, caring, building together. Old Brack approached the group slowly, his ancient frame supported by a walking stick carved from mammoth bone. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of countless winters and the wisdom of someone who had seen many communities face similar crossroads. In long life, he said slowly, I learned that survival and living are different things. Orphan teaches survival, very important, very necessary. But families teach living, also important, also necessary. Question is not which teaching better, but how to have both. Vera looked up sharply at the old firekeeper. How can we have both? Kale teacher and families want different things. They see world differently. Maybe, Brack nodded thoughtfully, different seeing means more complete understanding. Maybe warrior knowledge and family love make persons stronger than either alone. The concept seemed to penetrate the children's trained cynicism in a way that purely emotional appeals had not. Their analytical minds, shaped by Kale's teaching, could grasp the logical possibility that multiple perspectives might provide better survival advantages than any single viewpoint. Kyle stood slowly, his weathered face reflecting internal struggle. When he spoke, his words came with visible effort, as if each admission cost him something precious. Old Firekeeper speaks wisdom I could not see, he said quietly. I taught you that trust makes weak, that depending on others leads to betrayal and death. But he looked around at the band members who had fed him, sheltered him, accepted him despite his strangeness. But these people could have left me to die. Instead they shared food, gave shelter, protected me from winter's cold. The children listened with growing confusion as their teacher systematically dismantled the philosophical foundation he had built their training upon. Maybe, Kyle continued with painful honesty, maybe I was wrong about community. Maybe surviving alone is not same as living well. Maybe you need both warrior strength and family love to be complete humans. Little Jorik had been edging closer to his mother throughout this exchange, and now he finally reached her side. When Senna's arms closed around him, the relief on her face was visible to everyone present. I want to stay with Mother Senna, he declared, but I also want to remember warrior lessons for when danger comes. One by one, the other children began to waver. Tam moved toward his parents, then stopped halfway, torn between loyalties. Vera remained rigidly beside Kyle, but her eyes kept drifting toward her father's familiar face. Only Nira seemed completely committed to following her teacher into exile. I go with Kale, teacher, she announced with finality. He needs someone to take care of him. He has no family, no one to love him. The 7-year-old's declaration struck everyone with its simple truth. In all their focus on protecting the children from Kale's influence, no one had considered that perhaps he needed protection too, not from external dangers, but from the isolation and trauma that drove his harsh teachings. Asha stepped forward slowly, her face streaked with tears but her voice steady. Near a child speaks truth. Orphan has no family, no community to belong to. Perhaps that is real problem, not his teaching, but his loneliness. The insight hung in the morning air like dawn mist, revealing a possibility no one had previously considered. What if the solution wasn't choosing between Kale's methods and the band's traditions, but finding a way to integrate both into something stronger than either alone? Thane looked at his fellow band members, reading the same thought in their faces that was forming in his own mind. The orphan's knowledge had proven valuable, perhaps invaluable for their survival, but his isolation had made that knowledge dangerous by divorcing it from the human connections that gave meaning to mere survival. "Orphan," Thane said slowly. "What if leaving not only answer? What if staying, but staying different? What if Band learns from your strength, and you learn from our love?" For the first time since his arrival, hope flickered in Cale's dark eyes. The possibility of belonging, truly belonging to something larger than himself, was more terrifying and more wonderful than any challenge he had ever faced. But the damage was done, and trust once broken was not easily repaired. The choice before them all was whether they could find a way forward together, or whether the fractures created by conflicting philosophies would ultimately drive them apart, regardless of their good intentions. 3 moons had passed since the morning when everything changed, and the first snows of winter were painting the valley floor white. The band had not just survived the crisis that nearly tore them apart, they had emerged stronger, though the path to healing had been neither simple nor without cost. Kyle stood at the edge of their winter shelter, watching as Nira and Jorik practiced the modified training exercises he now taught under careful supervision. The lessons were still rigorous, still focused on survival skills, but they were tempered by something he was slowly learning to value, the wisdom of gradual development within community safety. "Remember," he called to the children, his voice carrying the authority of experience, but also a gentleness that had been absent in his earlier teaching. "Knowledge of pressure points serves healing first, protection second. Never for hunting unless all other choices exhausted." The change in his approach had not come easily. For weeks after Thane's ultimatum, Cale had struggled to understand how his methods could coexist with the band's traditional values. The breakthrough had come when old Brack suggested that perhaps the most important survival skill of all was learning to live peacefully with others. Asher approached from the main fire, carrying a bowl of hot broth that steamed in the cold air. Her relationship with Cale remained complicated. She could never fully forgive what he had done to her daughter's innocence, but she had come to understand that his intentions had been protective, even if his methods were traumatic. "Children learn well," she said, settling beside him on a sun-warmed rock. "But they also laugh now, play games, act like children sometimes." Kyle nodded, watching as Jorik abandoned his practice to chase a snow hare that had ventured too close to their camp. The boy's warrior training remained intact. His movements were still fluid and precise, but his purpose had shifted from deadly efficiency to simple joy. "I understand now why you fought my teaching," Kyle said quietly. "Childhood lost too early creates adults who cannot trust, cannot love, cannot find meaning beyond mere survival." The admission had taken months to reach. Only by observing how the children's personalities began to recover when their training was balanced with play, family time, and community responsibilities had Cale begun to understand what his isolated perspective had cost them. Thane emerged from the shelter where he had been tending to Mech, whose claw wounds had healed but left him with reduced mobility that required the band's support. The Alpha Hunter's initial resentment toward Cale had gradually transformed into something approaching respect, though their philosophical differences remained significant. "Vera asks if she can begin teaching other children basic tracking signs," Thane reported. "Says knowledge should be shared, not hoarded." The request represented the evolution Cale's teaching had undergone, where once he had created an exclusive bond with 4 students, isolating them from their peers, he now encouraged them to share appropriate knowledge with the entire band. The skills remained valuable, but they were no longer divisive. "Good," Kyle replied, "but with supervision, and starting with safe skills, reading animal signs, identifying edible plants, recognizing weather patterns. Combat techniques wait until they are older." The compromise had been difficult for him to accept. His traumatic past demanded that children be prepared for the worst immediately, but his growing understanding of community dynamics had taught him that premature exposure to violence caused more harm than benefit. Tam appeared from behind a snow-covered boulder, his successful completion of a tracking exercise evident in his proud expression. At 6 years old, he could follow animal trails with skill that impressed adult hunters, but he could also spend hours playing simple games with children his own age. "Cale teacher," he called out, "I found the winter den signs you showed us. But I also found something else. Fresh human tracks, maybe 2 days old." The information sent a chill through the adult listeners that had nothing to do with winter cold. Strange humans in their territory could mean traders, refugees or raiders, and with winter approaching, desperate people sometimes made dangerous choices. "Show me," Kyle said, rising with the fluid grace that still marked him as a predator despite his efforts to integrate into community life. But Thane stepped forward as well. "We investigate together," he said firmly. "Your knowledge, our methods, both necessary for safety." The partnership that had developed between the Orphan and the Alpha Hunter represented the band's new approach to survival. Kale's individual skills complemented the group's traditional tactics, creating a more robust defense than either method alone could provide. As they prepared to examine the mysterious tracks, the four children who had been at the center of the crisis gathered around their teachers, both the one who had taught them warrior skills and the one who reminded them that warriors served communities, not themselves. "If strangers are dangerous," Nira asked with the directness that still occasionally startled adults, "do we fight them or try to help them?" The question encapsulated the ongoing challenge of balancing Kale's harsh pragmatism with the band's traditional values of hospitality and mutual aid. There were no easy answers, but there were thoughtful approaches that considered multiple possibilities. "We watch first," Thane replied. "Learn their intentions, their needs, their capabilities. Then we decide based on what we observe, not what we fear. And if watching shows danger," Vera pressed, "then we use whatever methods necessary to protect band," Kyle added. "But protection first goal, not conquest. We defend what we love, not attack what we fear." The distinction represented months of difficult discussions about when violence was justified and when it became corrupting. The children absorbed these nuances with the same intensity they had once brought to purely tactical training, but now their learning was shaped by moral considerations as well as practical ones. Old Brack's voice drifted from the main fire, where he was sharing stories with the younger children who had not been part of Kale's intensive training program. And so the hunter learned that strongest prey is community itself. Cannot be caught alone, cannot be killed by single predator, survives through sharing strength. The Firekeeper's tales had evolved to incorporate lessons from their recent crisis, weaving traditional wisdom together with new understanding in ways that helped the entire band process what they had experienced. As Kale and Thane set out to investigate the mysterious tracks, followed by their joint students, the winter camp settled into the rhythms that had emerged from their difficult reconciliation. Children learned survival skills alongside community values. Adults balanced individual preparedness with collective security. Knowledge was shared rather than hoarded, but shared responsibly rather than recklessly. The approaching winter would test their new synthesis of methods. Harsh weather, potential food shortages, and the unknown threat represented by strange human tracks would challenge both their survival skills and their community bonds. But they faced these challenges together, with the hard-won wisdom that neither pure strength nor pure love alone was sufficient for the full richness of human life. Kyle had taught them that the world was dangerous. Their families had taught them that love made danger bearable. Together, these lessons created something neither could achieve alone, a community capable of both fierce protection and gentle nurturing, of individual excellence and collective strength. The sun climbed higher in the pale winter sky, painting the snow-covered valley in shades of gold and silver. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them not as isolated individuals or helpless dependents, but as a band united by the understanding that true survival required both the courage to fight and the wisdom to know what was worth fighting for. In the distance, the tracks of unknown strangers waited to be read, their story yet to be discovered. But the band that would investigate them was no longer the same group that had first welcomed a scarred orphan into their midst. They had been changed by crisis, tempered by conflict, and strengthened by the difficult work of choosing love and knowledge together rather than being forced to choose between them. The new dawn had come, bringing with it both familiar dangers and unprecedented possibilities. And for the first time since losing his family, Kale faced the future not as a survivor bearing witness to loss, but as a member of something larger and more enduring than individual strength alone could ever be.